"You're dead weight now, Mom. Find yourself a nursing home where you belong and stop embarrassing yourself." Those were the exact words my son Derek said to me while I was standing in the stable where I'd fed our horses every morning for 28 years. He said it with such vicious coldness, like he was talking to a stranger who'd overstayed their welcome. I was holding a bucket of oats for Thunder, our oldest therapy horse, and my hands started shaking so badly that the oats spilled all over the barn floor. Dead weight. After 47 years of marriage to his father Frank, after raising Derek as a single focus of my life, after working alongside Frank to build our therapeutic horse farm from nothing into a $31 million operation that helped hundreds of wounded veterans, my own son called me dead weight. I'm Barbara Jean Matthews. I'm 71 years old, and I'm here in my kitchen on our beautiful horse farm in Nashville, Tennessee. Yes, our farm, and I'm going to tell you exactly how I got it back from my ungrateful son. What happened after Derek threw me off my own property will restore your faith that justice still exists in this world. Before I continue, I need you to do something important for me. Tell me in the comments what you're doing right now while listening to my story. Are you having your morning coffee, maybe taking care of your own animals, or just enjoying a peaceful moment? Hit that like button, because each like is so important to help my voice reach other women who need to hear this. And subscribe to Grandma's Legacy, because no woman should ever feel thrown away by her own children. Right now, I'm sitting at my farmhouse kitchen table, looking out at 30 beautiful horses grazing in our pastures. The Tennessee morning sun is painting the rolling hills gold and green. My coffee is steaming in the mug Frank gave me for our 40th anniversary, and I can hear Thunder nickering in the barn where Derek once told me I didn't belong. But just 11 months ago, I was crying myself to sleep in a cramped apartment in downtown Nashville, wondering how my only child could destroy everything his father and I had built together. Frank had been gone for exactly 1 week when Derek showed up at the farmhouse with his wife Crystal and a stack of legal documents. He walked into our living room, the same room where Frank and I had planned every aspect of our therapeutic writing program, and delivered that crushing blow about being dead weight. Then he handed me a check for $15,000 and told me I had 72 hours to pack my personal belongings and leave the property. He claimed Frank had left him everything: the farm, the horses, the house, all of it. He said I was too old and frail to handle the responsibility of caring for million-dollar horses, and that the Veterans Program was more trouble than it was worth. I believed him, because what mother expects her own son to lie about something so sacred? Frank had spent the last 15 years of his life building our Healing Hooves for Heroes program, working with traumatized veterans who found peace and healing through our horses. Why would Derek destroy something so beautiful? But Frank always used to say, "Barbara, watch people's actions when they think nobody's looking. That's when you see their true character." I should have been watching Derek more carefully. What I discovered 8 days later didn't just expose Derek's lies. It revealed a betrayal so deep it nearly destroyed everything Frank had worked for. And when you hear what Derek was really doing with the money meant for our wounded heroes, you'll understand why he's now cleaning horse stalls and begging for my forgiveness every single day. Let me take you back to 1976, when I was 24 years old, and Nashville was still more country than pop, when the Grand Ole Opry was the heart of our city and farmers still dominated the countryside around town. I was working as a veterinary assistant at Cornerstone Animal Hospital, making about $9,000 a year, when Frank Matthews brought in an injured thoroughbred mare that would change both our lives forever. Frank was 32, ruggedly handsome in that authentic cowboy way, and he had the gentlest hands I'd ever seen with animals. The mare had been caught in barbed wire, and Frank stayed with her through a 4-hour surgery, talking to her in this soft, reassuring voice that made me fall in love with him before I even learned his name. Back then, gas was 59 cents a gallon. A nice house in Nashville cost $25,000, and Frank was just starting to make his mark in the horse business. He'd inherited 40 acres and 3 horses from his grandfather, but Frank had bigger dreams. He wanted to build something meaningful, something that would help people heal. We got married in 1978, right around the time everyone was dancing to Boogie Oogie Oogie and worrying about the energy crisis. Our wedding was at the little country church where Frank's family had worshipped for 3 generations. Frank said our first dance song, Always on My Mind, was perfect because I'd be in his thoughts every moment for the rest of his life. We honeymooned at a cabin in the Smoky Mountains, and I knew I'd found my forever home. Derek came along in 1980, the same year Mount St. Helens erupted and everyone was talking about who shot JR on Dallas. Frank was absolutely thrilled about having a son. He'd carry Derek around the barn, introducing him to every horse like they were family members. "Barbara," he'd say, "this little boy is going to love these horses as much as we do. He's got the Matthews gift with animals." How wrong we were about that gift. Frank built Matthews Horse Farm through the 1980s and 1990s, but it wasn't just about breeding and selling horses. Frank had served briefly in Vietnam before I met him, and he never forgot the struggles of coming home from war. In the early 2000s, when veterans started returning from Iraq and Afghanistan with invisible wounds, Frank got the idea for equine therapy. "Barbara," he told me one evening in 2008, "these horses saved my sanity after Vietnam. Maybe they can help these young soldiers too." That conversation led to the creation of Healing Hooves for Heroes, our therapeutic riding program for veterans dealing with PTSD, depression, and physical disabilities. Frank partnered with the VA hospital and several veteran service organizations to provide free therapy sessions using our specially trained horses. I was the perfect partner for Frank's vision. While he handled the horses and worked directly with the veterans, I managed the business side, coordinating with social workers, tracking the veterans' progress, organizing fundraising events for the program. I wasn't just Frank's wife, I was his business partner in every sense. Derek grew up surrounded by this mission of service, but he never seemed to understand it. While Frank was teaching traumatized veterans to trust again through connections with our gentle horses, Derek was calculating the market value of each animal. When he graduated from Middle Tennessee State University in 2002 with a business degree, Frank was proud to bring him into the operation as our financial manager. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I missed. Derek always had a mercenary attitude about the farm. When he was 12, I found him trying to sell rides on our horses to neighborhood kids for $5 each. When he was 18, he suggested we should charge the veterans for their therapy sessions, because people value what they pay for. Frank's program kept expanding through the 2010s. We built new stables, purchased more specially trained therapy horses, and expanded our property to 200 acres. By 2020, we were helping over 300 veterans a year, and the farm was valued at $31 million. Not just for the land and buildings, but for our incredible collection of 40 therapeutic horses, some worth over $100,000 each. Frank was so proud of what we'd built. "Barbara, we're not just running a horse farm, we're saving lives. These veterans come to us broken, and they leave here with hope again." But Frank started acting worried in his final years. He'd get strange phone calls and step outside to take them. He started keeping closer track of our finances, checking bank statements that Derek usually handled. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at Derek with this disappointed expression, like he was seeing something in his son that broke his heart. The last thing Frank said to me was, on January 20th, 2023, the day before his cancer finally took him. He was lying in our bed, weak but still fighting, when he grabbed my hand and said, "Barbara, if anything happens to me, call Jim Peterson at the law office before you do anything else. Don't trust anyone else, not even Derek." I should have listened more carefully to that warning. Frank's battle with pancreatic cancer ended on January 21st, 2023, just 6 months after his diagnosis. He died peacefully in our bedroom, holding my hand, with Derek sitting quietly in the corner chair. The doctor said Frank had fought harder and longer than most patients with his condition. Typical Frank, never giving up on anything that mattered to him. The funeral was beautiful in the way Frank would have appreciated. The little country church was packed with veterans who'd found healing through our horses, neighbors who'd watched Frank build something meaningful, and fellow horse people who respected what we'd accomplished. At least 60 veterans showed up in their dress uniforms to honor the man who'd helped them reclaim their lives. But during the funeral, I started noticing things about Derek that made me uncomfortable. While I was crying for the husband I'd lost, Derek was checking his phone and whispering with Crystal about logistics. When veterans approached me to share stories about how Frank had saved their lives, Derek would interrupt and steer the conversations toward business matters. The most disturbing moment came when Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a young veteran who'd lost his leg in Afghanistan, tried to tell me how thunder had helped him learn to walk again with confidence. Derek actually cut him off mid-sentence and said, "Mom doesn't need to hear all these war stories right now." The day after we buried Frank, Derek showed up at the farmhouse with Crystal and a briefcase full of documents. He found me in the kitchen, still wearing my black funeral dress, trying to force down a piece of toast for the first time in 3 days. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's estate," Derek announced, spreading papers across the kitchen table like he was conducting a board meeting. "I know this is hard, but there are legal and financial issues that can't wait." According to Derek, Frank had revised his will 8 months before his death, naming Derek as the primary beneficiary of the farm, the horses, and all business assets. Derek explained it with this fake sympathetic tone that made my skin crawl. "Dad realized that you're 71 years old, Mom, and managing a $31 million operation is way beyond your capabilities. He wanted to protect you from that kind of stress and responsibility." My heart started pounding. "But Derek, this farm is my life too. I've worked alongside your father for 28 years building this program." Crystal leaned forward with this condescending smile. "Barbara, you've done a wonderful job as Frank's assistant, but running a business this complex requires expertise you simply don't have. Derek has an MBA and years of experience managing the finances." "We've found you a beautiful assisted living community in Nashville," Derek added. "It's specifically designed for active seniors. You'll have activities, social opportunities, and professional care when you need it." I felt like the ground was falling away beneath me. "Assisted living? Derek, I'm not sick or disabled. This is my home." That's when Derek's mask completely fell off, and I saw the stranger my son had become. His face turned cold and cruel, and he delivered the words that still echo in my nightmares. "You're dead weight now, Mom. Find yourself a nursing home where you belong and stop embarrassing yourself." The next few days were a blur of systematic destruction. Derek had the locks changed on the farm office, claiming it was for security and insurance purposes. He started bringing in people he called livestock appraisers to evaluate our therapy horses. Most shocking of all, he canceled 3 scheduled therapy sessions for veterans without consulting anyone. When I confronted him about the canceled sessions, Derek's response chilled me to the bone. "Mom, we can't have liability issues with traumatized soldiers around million-dollar horses. It's too risky from a business standpoint." I tried calling Dr. Sarah Martinez, the VA psychologist who coordinated many of our veteran referrals, to explain what was happening. But Derek had already contacted her, claiming that the therapeutic riding program was being temporarily suspended due to ownership transition and insurance concerns. When I attempted to call Jim Peterson, Frank's attorney and the man Frank had specifically told me to contact, Derek intercepted my call. "Mom, Jim Peterson is 83 years old and semi-retired. We've moved all of Dad's legal affairs to a more modern firm that specializes in complex estate planning and agricultural businesses. You don't need to worry about those technical details." That should have been my biggest warning sign, but I was so overwhelmed with grief and shock that I couldn't think straight. Derek kept reinforcing the narrative that I was too old, too fragile, and too inexperienced to understand complicated business matters. The breaking point came on January 28th, exactly 1 week after Frank's death. Derek and Crystal arrived at 7 a.m. with a moving truck and 4 workers. Derek walked into our bedroom, the bedroom where Frank had died just 7 days earlier, and announced that the movers were there to help me pack my personal belongings. "Derek, your father just died a week ago," I said, my voice shaking with disbelief. "I haven't even begun to process losing him, and you're throwing me out of our home?" Derek looked at me with such cold calculation that I barely recognized the child I'd raised. "Mom, you need to face reality. This farm is worth $31 million, and I can't let sentimental feelings put that investment at risk. You had a good run, but now it's time for people with actual business sense to take over." As the movers packed my life into boxes, Derek walked through our home like a real estate appraiser, pointing out which furniture he was keeping and which pieces were going to charity. Frank's favorite reading chair, donated. My grandmother's quilt, stored away. The photo albums documenting our entire marriage and Derek's childhood, packed in boxes I couldn't afford to keep in storage. That night, in a sterile apartment that smelled like disinfectant instead of horses and hay, I cried until I had no tears left. I woke up on January 29th, feeling like I'd aged 20 years in 1 week. The apartment walls were paper thin, and I could hear the upstairs neighbor's television all night. Back at our farm, Derek's farm now, I kept reminding myself. Frank and I used to wake up to the sound of horses nickering their good morning greetings. Here, all I could hear was traffic and the constant hum of the city. I made coffee using paper cups because my good china was somewhere in a storage unit I couldn't afford to keep paying for. That's when I remembered Frank's last words. "Call Jim Peterson at the law office before you do anything else. Don't trust anyone else, not even Derek." Jim Peterson had been Frank's attorney for over 25 years. Jim had handled our farm purchase, our business incorporation, and all our estate planning. But Derek had told me that Jim was too old and that they'd moved to a more modern firm. Something about that explanation felt wrong. Frank trusted Jim completely, even considered him a friend. Why would Frank tell me to call Jim if he'd switched attorneys just months before his death? I looked up Peterson and Associates and dialed at exactly 9 a.m. When I asked to speak with Jim Peterson, the receptionist put me through immediately. "Barbara, thank God you're calling." Jim's familiar voice sounded genuinely relieved. "I've been trying to reach you for over a week. Derek told me you were too distraught to handle legal discussions and that all communication should go through him, but I really needed to speak with you directly." My hands started trembling. "Jim, I need to understand what Frank really left me. Derek says there's just some kind of trust arrangement, but I need to see the actual will." There was a pause. Then Jim said something that made my heart stop. "Barbara, what exactly has Derek told you about Frank's will?" I explained everything. How Derek claimed to inherit the farm and horses, how I was supposedly too old and incapable to handle the business, how I'd been moved to an assisted living situation because I was dead weight. A longer pause. Then Jim's voice got very serious. "Barbara, I need you to come to my office right now. Bring someone with you if possible, and don't tell Derek about this call." 2 hours later, I was sitting in Jim Peterson's office with my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, watching Jim pull out Frank's actual will with hands that were shaking. "Barbara," Jim said gently, "Frank never changed his will. The document Derek showed you was a complete fabrication." The room started spinning. "What do you mean?" Jim opened Frank's real will, the one filed with the probate court. "Frank left you everything, Barbara. The farm, the horses, the house, all business assets. But there's a very specific condition attached to Derek's inheritance." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear him. "What condition?" Derek was supposed to inherit a substantial amount, about $3 million, but only if he continued the veteran therapy program with integrity and honor for at least 1 year after Frank's death. If Derek abandoned the veterans or showed moral unfitness, his inheritance would be forfeited. I couldn't breathe. He canceled the therapy sessions, which automatically voided his inheritance under the terms of Frank's will. But Barbara, there's something else. Something much worse. Jim pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. "Frank came to see me 4 months before he died. He was deeply concerned about some financial irregularities he'd discovered in the farm's accounts." "What kind of irregularities?" "Frank hired a private investigator to audit Derek's financial management. What they found was devastating." Jim opened the folder, revealing bank statements, canceled checks, and accounting records. Derek has been embezzling money from the veteran therapy program for 3 years. The room felt like it was tilting. Embezzling how? Donations meant for the therapy program, money from fundraising events, grants from veteran organizations, private donations from supporters. Derek was diverting it into personal accounts. The investigator documented over $400,000 in stolen funds. I felt sick to my stomach. People donated that money to help wounded veterans. It gets worse, Barbara. Derek was also selling therapy horses without authorization and pocketing the proceeds. Thunder, the horse that helped Sergeant Rodriguez learn to walk again? Derek sold him to a private buyer in Kentucky for $80,000 and told everyone Thunder had died of colic. Tears started flowing down my face. Thunder wasn't dead. He'd been stolen from the veterans who loved him. There's more, Jim continued grimly. Derek created fake invoices for horse feed, veterinary care, and facility maintenance, then paid the inflated bills to shell companies he controlled. Frank's investigator estimated that Derek stole over $800,000 in total. I was crying so hard I could barely speak. All that money was supposed to help veterans. Jim handed me a handwritten letter. Frank wrote this for you, Barbara. He wanted you to have it if something happened to him. Through my tears, I read Frank's final message. My dearest Barbara, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've discovered what Derek has become. It breaks my heart that our son chose greed over honor, chose to steal from the very veterans we dedicated our lives to helping. I've documented everything and reported it to the FBI. Derek doesn't know that federal agents are investigating him for fraud against veteran service organizations. Everything I've done was to protect you and bring justice for the veterans Derek betrayed. You are the strongest woman I know, my love. Fight for what's right. All my love always, Frank. If you're feeling the shock and betrayal I felt in that moment, show your support. Hit that like button. Comment if you've ever discovered family members were stealing from causes you believed in. And subscribe because we strong women need to stick together when we uncover the most heartbreaking truths. Jim, I said, wiping my tears and feeling my voice get stronger. What do we do now? Jim Peterson smiled grimly. Now, Barbara, we take back your farm, save those horses, and make sure Derek faces justice for what he's done to you and those veterans. The battle for everything Frank and I had built was about to begin. Walking out of Jim Peterson's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Frank's death, righteous fury mixed with crystal-clear purpose. Not the helpless despair I'd felt as a widow being manipulated, but the kind of focused determination that comes when you realize you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. My first stop was First Tennessee Bank, where Jim had arranged for me to access the farm accounts that were rightfully mine. When the bank manager, Mr. Williams, pulled up our business records, his face went pale. Mrs. Matthews, there have been some very concerning transactions on these accounts. Someone's been transferring large sums without proper authorization, but fortunately, our fraud detection system flagged several attempts and put temporary holds on the funds. Derek had been trying to drain our accounts before Frank was even buried. Mr. Williams, I need complete records of every transaction Derek made over the past 6 months, I said, my voice steady and businesslike. And I want to speak with whoever Derek claimed gave him authority to access these funds. While we waited for the records, I called the FBI field office in Nashville. Jim had given me the contact information for Agent Rachel Thompson, who was already investigating Derek's theft from veteran organizations. Mrs. Matthews, we've been hoping to speak with you, Agent Thompson said when I identified myself. Your husband provided us with substantial evidence of your son's criminal activities before his death. We need your cooperation to build a case that will protect the victims and recover the stolen funds. Agent Thompson, I'll do whatever it takes to get justice for those veterans and get our therapy horses back. Excellent. We're going to need you to act normally around Derek while we prepare to execute search warrants. Can you handle that? I thought about Thunder, sold away from the veterans who loved him. I thought about all the donation money Derek had stolen from people trying to help wounded warriors. Agent Thompson, I can handle whatever you need me to do. Perfect. We'll be moving within 48 hours, but first, we need to get you back to your farm with legal authorization. That's when Agent Thompson smiled. How would you feel about surprising your son with a little visit from his mother and some federal agents? The next morning, I put on my best dress, the navy blue one Frank had bought me for our anniversary, and drove out to our farm for the first time since Derek had thrown me out. My hands were shaking as I turned into our gravel driveway, but they were shaking with anticipation, not fear. I could see our horses grazing in the pastures, and my heart broke a little because I noticed several missing. Derek had obviously sold more of our therapy horses than just Thunder. I walked up to the farmhouse door and rang the bell, ringing the bell at my own home because Derek had changed all the locks. When Crystal opened the door, the look of shock on her face was almost comical. "Barbara, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Crystal. I need to collect some of Frank's personal papers from his office, some insurance documents that are apparently very important." My voice was calm, almost sweet. Derek appeared from the kitchen, looking panicked. "Mom, we've been through this. All of Dad's papers are being handled by professionals now. You don't have legal authority to—" "Actually, Derek, I have all the authority I need." I stepped aside as Jim Peterson, Agent Thompson, and 3 other FBI agents walked onto our front porch. "Derek Matthews and Crystal Matthews," Agent Thompson announced, showing her badge. "FBI. We have a federal search warrant for these premises and arrest warrants for both of you." Derek's face went white as Agent Thompson continued. "You're under arrest for fraud against veteran service organizations, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." The next 20 minutes were like watching karma work in real time. As federal agents searched our house and barn, Derek kept trying to claim there had been some misunderstanding, while Crystal started crying and saying she didn't know anything about the finances. But the most satisfying moment came when Agent Thompson pulled out her handcuffs. "Derek Matthews, you have the right to remain silent." As they read Derek his Miranda rights, he turned to me with this desperate, pleading expression. "Mom, you can't let them do this to me. I'm your son." "You stopped being my son the moment you called me dead weight and threw me out of my own home," I said calmly. "But you really stopped being my son when you started stealing from wounded veterans." Jim Peterson handed me the keys to our farm. "Welcome home, Barbara." As I watched the FBI car drive away with Derek and Crystal in the back seat, I walked into our barn for the first time in over a week. The horses I could see were healthy, but clearly confused by all the changes. I found Buttercup, our gentlest therapy mare, and she nuzzled my shoulder like she was saying, "Welcome back." For the first time since Frank died, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. But my work was just beginning. I had horses to recover, veterans to help, and a program to rebuild. Derek had tried to destroy everything Frank and I had created, but he'd forgotten something important. I wasn't just Frank's widow. I was his partner in every sense of the word, and I knew how to fight for what mattered. The next few weeks were like watching dominoes fall in the most satisfying way possible. Derek, who just days earlier had been calling me dead weight and treating our farm like his personal cash machine, was now calling me from the Davidson County Jail, crying and begging for help. "Mom, please, you have to help me," he sobbed during his first call from jail. "This is all blown out of proportion. I was just trying to modernize the business. You have to believe me." "Derek," I said calmly, "I seem to remember you telling me to find a nursing home where I belonged. Perhaps you should find your own way now." The FBI's investigation moved swiftly once they had Frank's evidence and my full cooperation. Agent Thompson showed me the complete scope of Derek's criminal enterprise, and it was even worse than I'd imagined. He hadn't just been stealing from our therapy program. He'd been defrauding multiple veteran organizations across Tennessee. Derek had created fake invoices for therapeutic horse training, submitted fraudulent grant applications claiming we served twice as many veterans as we actually did, and even set up bogus fundraising events where he pocketed the donations. The FBI estimated he'd stolen over $1.2 million from organizations trying to help wounded warriors. Within 72 hours of the arrests, the Nashville Tennessean picked up the story. The headline made me both proud and heartbroken. Son defrauds $1 million veteran therapy program, throws elderly mother off farm. Suddenly, our family's private nightmare was public, but it also brought forward more victims and more evidence. The most devastating discovery came when Agent Thompson called me on the third day after the arrests. "Mrs. Matthews, we've located Thunder and 6 other horses that Derek sold illegally. The buyers had no idea the horses were stolen from a veteran therapy program. They're willing to return them immediately." I cried when Thunder was brought back to our farm. Sergeant Rodriguez, the young veteran who'd learned to walk again with Thunder's help, came out to see his old friend. When Thunder recognized Mike and gently nuzzled his prosthetic leg, both Mike and I were in tears. "Mrs. Matthews," Mike said, "we all thought Thunder had died. Derek told us there was a colic outbreak and that several horses didn't make it." That lie broke my heart. Derek had used the grief of traumatized veterans to cover up his theft. Derek's financial empire collapsed overnight when banks froze all his accounts. The expensive truck he drove was repossessed. The luxury condo he and Crystal had been renting in Nashville was foreclosed when they couldn't make payments. Crystal's designer wardrobe, the vacations they'd taken with stolen money, the country club memberships, all gone. On the 4th day after the arrests, Derek's public defender called Jim Peterson with a desperate plea. Derek was willing to cooperate with the FBI and testify against other people in his fraud network in exchange for a reduced sentence. "Apparently your son wasn't the only one stealing from veteran programs," Jim told me. "The FBI thinks this goes much deeper than just our farm." But the most satisfying moment came when Derek's bail hearing was held. The federal judge, after hearing testimony about the scope of the fraud and the number of veteran victims, set Derek's bail at $500,000. Derek called me that evening, desperate and panicked. "Mom, I need you to post bail for me. I can't stay in here. These people are dangerous. Please, I'll do anything." I thought about Frank's letter, about the veterans Derek had betrayed, about being called dead weight in my own barn. Then I did something that surprised even me. "Derek, I'll post your bail under one condition." "Anything, Mom, anything." "You come back to the farm and work for me. You start at minimum wage, cleaning horse stalls and doing manual labor. You face the veterans you stole from and apologize to every single one. And you never, ever make a business decision about this farm again." There was a long silence. "You want me to clean horse stalls? You wanted me to rot in a nursing home. I'm offering you honest work and a chance to make partial amends for what you've done." Derek's pride warred with his desperation. Desperation won. "Okay, Mom, okay, I'll do it." I posted Derek's bail the next day, and he came back to our farm as my employee, not my partner. Watching him muck out stalls in the same barn where he'd called me dead weight was poetic justice of the highest order. But the real victory came when I reopened our therapy program just 2 weeks after getting the farm back. Veterans started returning, and when they saw Thunder and the other horses healthy and happy, the joy on their faces reminded me why Frank and I had started this program in the first place. Derek had tried to turn our mission into money, but love and service had won in the end. 9 months later, I was standing in our main barn at sunrise, watching Derek muck out the stalls while our therapy horses got ready for another day of healing work. The sight of my son doing honest labor for the first time in his adult life still amazed me. Derek had gone from stealing from veterans to literally shoveling their horses' manure, and the irony wasn't lost on either of us. The transformation of our farm and my life had been remarkable. Not only had we recovered all the stolen horses, but donations had poured in from across the country when people learned our story. Veterans organizations, horse lovers, and ordinary Americans who were outraged by Derek's betrayal sent checks, supplies, and volunteers to help us rebuild what he'd tried to destroy. "Mrs. Matthews," called out Dr. Sarah Martinez as she walked into the barn. "The new group of veterans from Fort Campbell will be here in an hour. Are Thunder and Buttercup ready for their therapy sessions?" Dr. Martinez was the VA psychologist who coordinated our program, and she'd been instrumental in helping us expand our services after Derek's arrest made national news. We were now serving over 400 veterans annually, more than we'd ever helped during Frank's lifetime. "They're ready, Dr. Martinez. Derek finished grooming them an hour ago." I gestured toward my son, who was now feeding hay to the horses with the same gentle patience Frank had always shown. Prison had changed Derek in ways I never expected. He'd spent 6 months in federal prison after cooperating with the FBI investigation that ultimately exposed a multi-state fraud network targeting veteran charities. When he was released, he was a different person, humble, remorseful, and desperate to make amends for what he'd done. The first day Derek returned to work at our farm, Sergeant Mike Rodriguez was there for his weekly therapy session with Thunder. I held my breath as Derek approached, not knowing how Mike would react to seeing the man who'd stolen his beloved therapy horse. Derek stopped about 10 feet away from Mike and said, "Sergeant Rodriguez, I know there's nothing I can say to make up for what I did, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I stole from you and every veteran this program was supposed to help, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that right." Mike looked at Derek for a long moment, then said, "Actions speak louder than words, son. Show me you've changed." That conversation happened 7 months ago, and Derek has been showing us every day since. He arrives at the farm at 5 a.m. and works until dark. He's learned to care for the horses with genuine love instead of seeing them as investments. Most importantly, he's learned to listen to the veterans' stories with respect instead of impatience. The legal consequences of Derek's crimes were severe but fair. He was ultimately sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, with 18 months suspended in exchange for his cooperation. He'll be on probation for 5 years, during which he must continue working at the farm and perform 500 hours of additional community service with veteran organizations. The financial restitution was equally significant. Derek forfeited every asset he'd purchased with stolen money, and those funds were returned to the defrauded veteran organizations. He'll be paying restitution for the next 15 years, but every penny will go to helping the people he hurt. But the most meaningful part of Derek's punishment was also the most personal. As part of his plea agreement, Derek had to write individual apology letters to every veteran who'd been affected by his theft, and he had to face many of them in person during victim impact hearings. I watched Derek break down completely when Mrs. Patricia Williams, the widow of a Vietnam veteran, told him how she donated her husband's life insurance money to our program because she wanted to help other veterans heal the way her husband never could. "You stole my husband's legacy," she told Derek through tears. "That money was sacred to me, and you spent it on vacations and luxury items while veterans suffered." Derek couldn't stop crying after that hearing. That night, he came to me and said, "Mom, I finally understand what Dad was trying to teach me about honor. I threw it all away for money that didn't even make me happy." My relationship with Derek now is complicated but hopeful. He's no longer the entitled son who called me dead weight, but he's also not the innocent child I once knew. He's something new, a broken man trying to rebuild himself through honest work and genuine service to others. The farm itself has flourished beyond anything Frank and I ever imagined. We've expanded to house 50 therapy horses, built new facilities for wounded veterans with physical disabilities, and even started a program for military families dealing with PTSD. The Charles Frank Matthews Center for Veteran Equine Therapy now operates year-round and has a waiting list of veterans hoping to participate. I've also discovered strengths I never knew I had. For 47 years, I'd been Frank's partner, but always in a supporting role. Now I'm the sole decision-maker for a multi-million-dollar operation, and I've found that I'm actually good at it. We've increased our veteran services by 200%, secured federal grants totaling over $2 million, and built partnerships with veteran organizations across the Southeast. The most rewarding part of my new life comes every morning when I see veterans working with our horses. Yesterday, I watched a young woman named Staff Sergeant Jennifer Torres, who lost both legs in an IED explosion in Syria, learn to ride again using our specially trained horses and adaptive equipment. The smile on her face when she successfully completed her first solo ride was worth more than all $31 million Derek had tried to steal. Derek sees these moments too, and I can tell they affect him deeply. Last week, he spent his lunch break helping build wheelchair-accessible ramps for our new riding arena. When I asked him about it, he said, "Mom, I spent 3 years stealing from people like Jennifer. Now I want to spend the rest of my life giving back to them." Some people have asked me why I gave Derek a second chance, why I didn't just let him rot in prison for what he did to me and the veterans we serve. The answer is complicated, but it comes down to this. Frank always believed in redemption through honest work and genuine service to others. Watching Derek transform from a selfish criminal into someone who genuinely cares about our veterans' healing has been painful but beautiful. If I could go back and tell that broken woman crying in that sterile apartment 11 months ago what I know now, I'd say this: "Barbara, stop letting them convince you that you're too old to fight back. The worst betrayal of your life is about to become your greatest victory for justice." You see, I spent 71 years thinking I was just the supportive wife, always in Frank's shadow, never the real leader. I thought I was too old and too sheltered to handle the brutal realities of business and betrayal. I thought I was worthless because my own son convinced me I was dead weight. But sometimes it takes losing everything to realize you were never as helpless as people wanted you to believe. The biggest lesson I've learned is that family isn't just about blood. It's about honor, integrity, and service to something bigger than yourself. Derek may be my biological son, but he became my real son only when he started showing genuine remorse and working to help the people he'd hurt. I want every woman listening to this story to understand something crucial. It's never too late to discover your true strength. I don't care if you're 55, 75, or 85 years old. You are not dead weight. You are not too old to manage complex affairs. You are not disposable when someone younger thinks they can do better. If someone in your family is pressuring you to give up control of your assets, telling you that you're incapable of handling your own affairs, or trying to rush you into decisions while you're grieving, stop. Get help. Call a lawyer. Trust your instincts, because they're probably telling you the truth that others want to hide. And to the adult children who might be listening, the ones who see their parents as obstacles to inheritance rather than human beings deserving of respect, remember this: honor isn't inherited, it's earned. Derek thought he was entitled to everything Frank and I had built, but entitlement without integrity is just theft with a family connection. Frank used to say that the true measure of a person is how they treat those who are vulnerable and can't fight back. Derek failed that test completely when he stole from wounded veterans and threw away his own mother. But watching him slowly earn back his honor through honest work and genuine service has taught me that redemption is possible for anyone willing to do the hard work. If this story of betrayal, justice, and unexpected redemption touched your heart, like this video right now, tell me in the comments about a time when you found strength you didn't know you had, and subscribe to Grandma's Legacy, because every grandmother has wisdom earned through fire and strength forged through struggle. Remember, each like is so important to help these stories reach women who need them most. I'm Barbara Jean Matthews. I'm 72 years old now, and I'm here to tell you that sometimes the people who call you dead weight are about to discover you're actually the foundation that holds everything together.